Hello and welcome to Test Your Arterial Knowledge, the Cardiovascular System. Now the way this Quizdio is going to work is that I'm going to show you a note card. In the center of the note card is the function of a particular artery. You have to guess which artery it is pertaining to. On the bottom left of the note card, it tells you which animals this artery can be found in. Can you guess which artery supplies blood to the pectoral limbs in the shark, mud puppy, and cat? You guessed it, it was the subclavian artery. In the shark and the mud puppy, the subclavian artery branches directly off the dorsal aorta, carrying oxygenated blood to the pectoral fins in the case of the shark and the pectoral limbs in the case of the mud puppy. In the cat, the right subclavian artery branches off the innominate artery and the left subclavian branches off the aortic arch. But in general, the subclavian artery is always sending oxygenated blood to the pectoral limbs. Can you guess which artery supplies the heart in the shark, mud puppy, and cat? I'm sure you guessed this one right. Even the heart needs to have oxygenated blood to continue pumping. So it gets supplied by the coronary artery. Can you guess which artery supplies the stomach in the shark, mud puppy, and the cat? That's it, the gastric artery. Gastric in essence means of the stomach. Thus, it makes sense that the gastric artery and its derivatives would be supplying the stomach with oxygenated blood. Can you guess which artery in the shark and mud puppy sends blood to the gills? The answer is the afferent bronchial arteries. The word afferent means moving towards something. So think of the afferent bronchial arteries as carrying deoxygenated blood towards the gills. Can you guess which artery sends blood to the coronary in the shark and the mud puppy? The answer is the commissural artery. In the shark and the mud puppy, the commissural artery branches off the gill arches. So the coronary is just a continuation of the commissural artery once the artery reaches the heart's ventricle. In mammals, the coronary artery branches directly off the aortic arch. Can you guess which artery supplies the rectal gland in the shark? When in doubt, any mesenteric artery sends blood to the intestine. However, there is always one exception, right? The posterior mesenteric artery is that exception, sending blood not to the intestine, but to the shark's rectal gland. Can you guess which artery supplies the liver in the shark, mud puppy, and the cat? I'm sure you guessed this one right. It's pretty easy. The word hepatic means of or relating to the liver, so it makes sense that the hepatic artery is sending oxygenated blood to the liver. The hepatic vein, on the other hand, is sending deoxygenated blood away from the liver and towards the heart. And then of course don't forget about the hepatic portal vein that is taking deoxygenated blood from the gastrointestinal tract to the liver to be detoxed. Can you guess which artery sends blood to the lungs in the mud puppy and the cat? The answer is the pulmonary artery. Now sharks don't have pulmonary arteries because they do not have lungs. So the word pulmonary means of or relating to the lungs. Remember that the pulmonary artery is sending deoxygenated blood to the lungs. It is the pulmonary vein that is bringing the oxygenated blood from the lung to the heart. So think of arteries as sending blood away from the heart and veins as sending blood towards the heart. Can you guess which artery in the shark and cat sends blood to the hepatic, gastric, splenic, and pancreatico arteries? The answer is the celiac artery. The celiac artery is the first major branch off the dorsal aorta that has subsequent branches supplying the vital organs of the digestive tract with oxygenated blood. Can you guess which artery supplies the brain and the face in the shark, mud puppy, and the cat? The answer is the carotid artery. The carotid arteries are very important. They are major arteries that are sending blood to our brain and our face and our scalp so that we can smile and live and think and breathe. In the shark and the mud puppy, the internal carotid is sending oxygenated blood to the brain, but they also have the external carotid sending blood to the lower jaw. Can you guess which artery supplies the spiral valve intestine in the shark? For this note card, there are two answers. First answer is anterior mesenteric artery, and the second is the pancreatico-mesenteric artery. When in doubt, mesenteric arteries send blood to the intestine. The pancreatico-mesenteric artery also supplies the pancreas, because if you recall, the pancreas is very closely associated to the small intestine as it releases digestive enzymes through the pancreatic duct into the duodenum. Can you guess which artery supplies the spleen and the stomach in the shark? This one's pretty easy once you learn the mnemonics for guessing the artery. If the gastric artery supplies the stomach and the splenic artery supplies the spleen, then it only makes sense that the gastrosplenic artery would supply both the stomach and the spleen. Can you guess which arteries receive oxygenated blood from the gills and sends the blood to the dorsal aorta in the shark and the mud puppy? The answer is the efferent bronchial arteries. The word efferent, unlike afferent, means carrying something away. So think of the efferent bronchial arteries as carrying oxygenated blood away from the gills, and it converges to become the dorsal aorta, sending the oxygenated blood to the entire body. Can you guess which artery sends blood to the kidney in the shark, mud puppy, and the cat? The answer is the renal artery. The word renal means of or relating to the kidney, so thus it makes sense that the renal artery is sending blood to the kidney. Can you guess which artery sends blood to the femoral artery in the mud puppy and the cat? The iliac artery is the last branch off the dorsal aorta in the shark, mud puppy, and the cat. In the mud puppy and the cat, the iliac sends blood through the femoral artery, which is in essence just a continuation of the iliac. In sharks, however, the iliac just supplies the pelvic fins with oxygenated blood directly. Can you guess which artery supplies the pyloric sphincter and the pancreas in the mud puppy? The answer is the pancreatico-duodenal artery. Remember that the duodenum is the first portion of the small intestine that is just behind the pyloric sphincter, and the pyloric sphincter is that muscle that expands and contracts to allow food through the stomach into the duodenum of the small intestine. So that pyloric sphincter needs to be supplied with blood as well to function. Can you guess which artery supplies the pancreatico-duodenal, splenic, hepatic, and mesenteric arteries in the mud puppy? is the celiaco-mesenteric artery. In the mud puppy, the major artery that supplies blood to the GI tract is the celiaco-mesenteric rather than just being called the celiac like in sharks and cats. Another difference between this artery and the celiac artery in sharks and cats is that the gastric arteries do not branch off the celiaco-mesenteric artery. The gastric artery itself branches off the dorsal aorta directly, prior to the branching of the celiaco-mesenteric artery. Can you guess which artery supplies the chest muscles in the cat? The answer is the mammary artery. The best way to remember this is just remember that the mammary glands are in the female chest, and so the mammary artery is supplying the chest muscles with blood. Can you guess which artery supplies the upper hind limb in the mud puppy and the cat? The answer is the femoral artery, and I don't think I need to explain that one because it just makes complete sense, because that is where the femur is. Can you guess which artery supplies the brainstem in the mud puppy and the cat? Cool tidbit, in The Walking Dead, the virus causing the dead to walk is actually turning on the brainstem. The brainstem houses the medulla oblongata that is important in just everyday actions that are basically for the function of survival, like breathing, eating, blinking, walking. The brainstem is sometimes called the lizard brain because it is relatively primitive. Can you guess which artery sends blood to the right subclavian and the carotid arteries in the cat? The answer is the innominate or brachiocephalic artery. The innominate artery is a major artery branching off the dorsal aorta or the aortic arch. It is the first branch off the aortic arch, and basically it trifurcates into the right subclavian and the carotid arteries. Can you guess which artery supplies the cloaca and the urinary bladder in the mud puppy? The answer is the hypogastric artery. The hypogastric artery is the main artery of the pelvis in mud puppies. In mammals, the internal iliac functions the same as the hypogastric artery, with the exception of supplying blood to a cloaca, since mammals don't have cloacas. Hypogastric in essence means under the stomach. Can you guess which artery supplies the armpit and the upper arm in mud puppies and cats? The answer is the axillary artery. The axillary artery is a continuation of the subclavian. In cats, the artery becomes the axillary after the thyrocervical artery branches off the subclavian. Can you guess which artery supplies the lower arm and the hand in the cat? The answer is the brachial artery. The brachial artery is a continuation of the axillary artery. The axillary artery becomes the brachial artery after the humeral artery branches off. I do want to point out that if you were to place an N between the A and the C in brachial, you would then have the word bronchial, which means of or relating, to respiration. So you would be wrong had you placed bronchial artery instead of brachial artery as the answer. Can you guess which artery supplies the posterior body wall in the mud puppy and the cat? The answer is the epigastric artery. In mammals, the external iliac is sometimes referred to as the epigastric artery. Can you guess which artery sends blood to the placenta from the fetus in cats? The answer is the umbilical artery. The fetus cannot use its lungs for gas exchange, so it relies on gas exchange from the mother. The umbilical artery takes the oxygenated blood away from the fetal heart to the mother to be oxygenated. The umbilical vein brings the oxygenated blood back to the fetus. And so I believe that is all the arteries that at least my students have to know for comparative anatomy. Hopefully this helped in studying their functions in the shark, the mud puppy, and the cat simultaneously. So, good luck!